There's a moment coming in Lioness Season 3 that's going to make you rewatch every conversation Jo has ever had with her own team. Because by Episode 4, the question isn't who attacked her. It's who let them in. Trust is a strange thing in a story like Lioness. It's built slowly, mission after mission, over years of people watching each other's backs in rooms where one wrong move gets someone killed. And once that trust breaks, it doesn't just crack quietly in the background. It poisons everything. That's the space Lioness Season 3 is stepping into as it heads toward Episode 4, and if you've been paying attention to how this season has been building, you probably already sense that something is deeply wrong inside Jo's own circle. Let's set the stage properly, because the weight of Episode 4 only lands if you understand exactly what Jo is walking into. Her cover was blown. Her location was found. And whoever came for her didn't stumble onto her by accident. They knew where she lived. They knew her patterns. They knew enough to move with precision instead of guesswork. In a world of intelligence operatives, that kind of accuracy doesn't come from luck. It comes from information. Someone gave it to them, whether they meant to or not, and that single fact changes the entire shape of the season. Here's what makes this so unsettling if you sit with it for a second. Jo has spent years operating under the assumption that the danger is always external. The enemy is out there, across borders, hiding behind fake names and foreign handlers. That's the job. That's the world she signed up for. But the moment her home address ends up in the wrong hands, the danger stops being something she can hunt down with a strike team. It becomes something that could be sitting 3 feet away from her at a briefing table, nodding along, pretending to be just as worried as everyone else. And that's really the emotional core of where this story is heading. It's not just a plot twist. It's a complete inversion of what safety even means for Jo. For someone whose entire identity is built around control, precision, and knowing exactly who she can rely on in a crisis, the idea that the leak might be internal is almost worse than the kidnapping itself. Physical danger, she knows how to fight. Betrayal from inside her own operation is a different kind of threat entirely, because you can't outshoot it. You can only try to outthink it. So who exactly are we talking about here? The show has spent this entire season quietly placing people around Jo who each carry their own reasons to be looked at twice. And when a story does that deliberately, spreading small moments of doubt across multiple characters instead of pointing hard at one obvious suspect, it's usually because the answer isn't meant to be simple. It's meant to feel like it could genuinely be any of them, and that uncertainty is exactly what keeps a season like this gripping. Think about the operators who work closest to Jo in the field. These are people who know her routines because they've trained alongside her, planned missions with her, and in some cases probably know more about her day-to-day movements than her own family does. That kind of closeness cuts both ways. It's what makes a team functional, but it's also exactly the kind of access that would let someone quietly pass along details without raising a single alarm. Nobody questions the person who's supposed to be there. Nobody double-checks the teammate they've trusted for years. That's not carelessness. That's just how trust works, and it's also exactly how it gets exploited. Then there's the layer above the field team, the people handling strategy, oversight, and communication with people far outside Jo's immediate world. This is where things get murkier, because access at that level isn't just about knowing Jo personally. It's about having visibility into systems, reports, and communications that a field operative might never even see. If someone wanted to leak information carefully, without leaving obvious fingerprints, operating from that kind of position would be the smarter move. It's quieter. It's more deniable. And it's a lot harder to trace back to a single moment of betrayal. What makes Episode 4 such a pivotal turning point isn't just the reveal of a wider network operating through handlers, though that alone is a massive escalation. It's what that reveal implies about the scale of what's actually been happening. A single leak is a crack in the system. A coordinated network operating through handlers is something else entirely. It suggests planning. It suggests patience. It suggests that whoever set this in motion wasn't reacting to Jo's mission in real time, but had been positioning pieces long before anyone on her team even suspected something was wrong. And that's the part that should genuinely worry viewers heading into this episode. If the people responsible have been building this quietly over time, then the attack on Jo's home wasn't the beginning of the threat. It was the moment the threat finally became visible. Everything before that point, every mission, every debrief, every seemingly routine conversation, suddenly has to be looked at differently. Because if there really is a structure feeding information outward, Then Joe's team hasn't just been dealing with one bad decision from one compromised person. They've been operating inside a system that was already broken, and they simply didn't know it yet. That's the environment Joe is stepping into as episode 4 begins. Not a straightforward hunt for an enemy hiding somewhere overseas, but a much colder, much more personal kind of investigation, one where every familiar face in the room becomes a question mark she can no longer afford to ignore. Once Joe accepts that the threat is internal, the entire nature of her job shifts. She's no longer just an operative running missions. She becomes someone who has to investigate the very structure she spent years trusting completely, and that's a brutal position to be in. It's one thing to hunt a stranger. It's another thing entirely to sit across from people you've bled alongside and wonder, quietly, which one of them let this happen. The smartest move Joe can make in this situation isn't a direct confrontation. Anyone who has spent real time in intelligence work knows that accusing someone without proof doesn't just fail to solve the problem, it actively makes it worse. If the person responsible senses they're being watched, they'll either go quiet or disappear entirely, and either way, Joe loses her only real chance at identifying them. So instead, this becomes a game of careful misdirection. Feed different pieces of information to different people. Watch closely. See which version of the story finds its way back out into the world. It's a method built on patience, and patience is exactly what makes for gripping television, because every scene becomes loaded with a question the audience is asking right alongside Joe. Is this the person? Is this the moment the truth slips out? What makes this approach so tense is that it turns ordinary interactions into something loaded with meaning. A simple briefing stops being routine. A quick hallway conversation stops being small talk. Every exchange becomes a potential test, and the audience knows it even when the characters on screen are trying to act like nothing has changed. That's a difficult tone to sustain, but it's also exactly the kind of slow-burn tension that keeps people leaning toward the screen instead of reaching for their phone. Meanwhile, there's a completely different kind of pressure building outside the field, back in the offices and hallways where decisions get made on paper instead of in the field. This is where things get complicated in a very human way. The people overseeing this operation can't simply announce that there's a mole. Doing that without solid proof doesn't just risk embarrassing the wrong person, it risks destabilizing an entire operation that other lives depend on. So while Joe is running her quiet test out in the field, the people above her are stuck in a much slower, much more frustrating fight, trying to hold together an operation that suddenly feels like it could collapse from the inside at any moment. That kind of institutional pressure rarely gets the same spotlight as the action-heavy moments of a show like this, but it matters just as much. It's the difference between a mission going wrong because of bad luck and a mission going wrong because the system protecting it was already compromised. When people in positions of oversight have to start weighing political consequences against operational safety, that's when you start seeing cracks form in leadership itself, and those cracks tend to matter just as much as anything happening out in the field. Now let's talk about why this particular kind of storyline hits differently than a normal espionage plot. Most spy stories thrive on outward danger. The enemy has a name, a face, a flag. You know who you're fighting, even if you don't know their next move. But an internal betrayal removes that clarity completely. It forces every character and every viewer to sit with genuine uncertainty. There's no comfort in knowing the shape of the threat, because the shape keeps shifting depending on who you're looking at in any given scene. And there's something deeply personal about this particular kind of story for Joe specifically. She isn't just protecting classified information or her own safety at this point. Her family has been pulled into this. Her home was targeted. Her partner and her kids are living under protection because of decisions made inside a program she has dedicated years of her life to. That changes the stakes from professional to deeply personal in a way that's impossible to separate. This isn't about protecting a mission anymore. It's about protecting the people she loves from a danger that originated inside the very organization meant to keep them safe. That emotional weight is going to be impossible to ignore as the episode unfolds. Somewhere in the middle of all this investigation, all this careful testing and quiet suspicion, there's a family sitting at home trying to process what their lives have become. And that tension, between the calculated, controlled world of intelligence work and the raw, unguarded fear of a family in hiding, is where this story finds its real emotional center. It's not just about catching a traitor. It's about what it costs Joe to have to become someone who trusts no one, even for a little while, in order to protect the people who trust her the most. What happens when the person you're hunting for turns out to be someone you've trusted for years? That's the question sitting at the center of everything as episode 4 pushes toward its breaking point, and it's not a question with a comfortable answer. By this stage, Joe's quiet test has done exactly what it was designed to do. Information has moved. Somewhere, a piece of it has landed where it shouldn't have, and that means the circle of suspects has finally started to narrow. But narrowing the list doesn't make the moment easier. If anything, it makes it harder, because now there's a name attached to the fear instead of just a vague sense that something is wrong. And once a name enters the picture, everything Joe thought she understood about her own team gets rewritten in an instant. This is where the bigger picture starts to come into focus. A single leak inside an operation is dangerous, but it's containable. You find the source, you cut them off, and the damage stops spreading. What episode 4 seems to be building toward is something far larger than that. A network operating through handlers isn't the work of one nervous person making a single bad decision under pressure. It's the work of something patient, something that's been quietly running in the background long before Joe's home was ever targeted. And if that's true, then the person feeding information outward from inside the Lioness program might not even fully understand how far their actions have traveled. Sometimes the most dangerous leaks don't come from someone plotting a betrayal. They come from someone who made one small compromise a long time ago and never realized how much it would eventually cost. That idea is genuinely unsettling when you sit with it. Because it means the traitor Joe is hunting for might not see themselves as a traitor at all. They might see themselves as someone who made a single mistake, one moment of pressure, one lapse in judgment, that spiraled into something they never intended. That doesn't make the consequences any less severe, but it does make the eventual confrontation far more complicated than a simple villain reveal. Real betrayal, the kind that actually lingers with an audience, rarely comes from someone twirling a mustache in the shadows. It comes from someone ordinary, someone who had a reason that made sense to them at the time, and that's exactly what makes this kind of storyline so hard to shake off once the credits roll. And underneath all of this, there's Neil. While Joe is out there running a psychological chess match with her own team, Neil is stuck at home, watching his family live under protection because of a job he never fully understood and has begged her to walk away for more than once. That frustration has been building for 2 full seasons now, and it feels like it's finally reaching a point where words aren't going to be enough anymore. There's a real possibility that episode 4 pushes him past the point of simply worrying from the sidelines. At some stage, fear stops being something you carry quietly, and it becomes something you act on. If Neil finally reaches that breaking point, it won't just be a personal moment between him and Joe. It'll be a direct challenge to everything she's built her identity around, and that kind of confrontation, the ones rooted in love rather than anger, tend to hit harder than any gunfight the show could put on screen. So where does that leave Joe heading into whatever comes next? Somewhere between duty and family, between an operation she spent years protecting and a home that's now living under armed guard because of it. That's an impossible place to stand, and it's exactly why this storyline works as well as it does. It's not just about catching a traitor. It's about what happens to a person when the two halves of their life, the mission and the family, finally collide with no way to protect one without risking the other. Whoever this person turns out to be, the damage is already done in a lot of ways. Joe now knows that trust inside her own program isn't something she can take for granted anymore, and that's a wound that doesn't close just because a name gets confirmed. Even after the traitor is found, even after the network gets exposed, there's going to be a lingering hesitation every time she walks into a room full of people she used to trust without question. That's the real cost of this storyline, and it's one the show has been quietly building toward since the very first signs of trouble this season. In the end, this isn't really a story about a mole hiding inside an intelligence program. It's a story about what happens when the people meant to protect you become the very thing you have to protect yourself from, and how far someone like Joe is willing to go to make sure her family never has to live in fear like this again. If this breakdown helped you make sense of where Season 3 is heading, do me a favor and hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel grow. And if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss the next breakdown the moment new details drop. Now I want to hear from you. Who do you think is really behind this leak, and how far do you think Neil is going to push before he asks Joe to walk away for good? Drop your theory in the comments below, because I have a feeling some of you are going to call this one before the show even confirms it.